It's a heavy book, and that tells me a lot to begin with. It's a good feel to it. It's nice to handle, Mark. You're so welcome. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
It's a while since we met. 20 years, maybe? Something like that.
So you tell me. I find that hard to believe.
It is hard to believe, but we were...
You haven't changed?
I've changed I don't
Not really.
We had great fun together. We worked hard in the worst times of the Troubles. And Mark and I were colleagues within the BBC. And we did things that got us through our day and hopefully made a wee difference, because we would have been biased towards positivity, I think, rather than black nastiness.
I'm sure that's right. What is our job as journalists? Our job is to report the facts, but the facts in their totality means that you don't always focus on the negative.
No. And there would be a predisposition, in my experience in the past, for the positive to be, forget about the positive. I remember doing a report when I was with The Independent back to the Dublin news desk, telling that there were 2 shots fired in West Belfast that evening. And the news editor said, "You mean there's a gun battle?" So suddenly we were turning the couple into a gun battle. But before we talk about the book, your career in the BBC has taken you to the dizzy heights of heavy political coverage in Northern Ireland. You've been the middleman in debate and discussion about issues of calamity and issues of breaking people apart in terms of their humanity. That we have this propensity to be nasty to each other, and you've been the ringmaster.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a very uncomfortable place to be, because you can get caught in the crossfire, as you know very well, whether it's in a radio studio or a television studio. But that, I suppose, goes with the territory, and you endeavour to arm yourself with the facts when you go in and take no side and take no position, and hopefully people will see you for what you are, which is an honest broker in the process. But it can be uncomfortable on occasions.
Of course, and they're not always keen to see you as that honest broker, because they will use you as part of their attack.
I mean, I think the challenge is, as you know very well, my job as an interviewer is to play devil's advocate, and what that opens you up to is the challenge that you are taking the other person's side. And I think sometimes politicians confuse devil's advocate with a position that somebody actually holds, and I don't hold a position. Certainly not publicly.
Yeah.
I may have private views, but they don't influence me when I'm doing my job. But sometimes I think people deliberately try to play on that.
Oh yeah, of course they do.
You have to be. But I mean, that's fine. That goes with the territory, and I'm well used to dealing with that.
The concept, of course, of impartiality is foreign to the groups that you're conducting in these interviews.
Well, I think very often what they do is they take a view that if you're not with us, you're against us, and if you dare to question our view, you must be a subscriber to the other side. And so, but that depends. If you view our politics in a binary way as only green and orange, then you have a problem. But I think it's a lot more complex than that.
It is, and part of my complexity was that I had, in my early days, the notion of founding the Alliance Party with people. And I was so enthusiastic about that. I was regarded as the OC, it was often said, of the military wing of the Alliance Party. But I got out of politics very, very early when I thought there's no mission on this. And any political views one has, as you well know, leave them at the door of the studio, going in, pick them up.
When you have to do that, and that's right, that you should do that.
Yeah. How are all my colleagues in the BBC?
They're
Connor's still there?
Mostly pretty good. Connor's still there.
Connor's still there.
A lot of people are still there, but a lot of people have moved on as well in the last 20 years.
Of course. Well, it's been a time of change within the organisation. Are you happy with the way things have gone within the organisation? Do they treat you well? Are they good bosses?
I have managed to keep my head above water, and I'm still there, and I'm
remarkably
enjoying
well, sir.
it. Yeah, it's good. I've got a very good brief at the moment, and politics is my passion, and to be the main presenter in our political output
Absolutely.
is, if I had to write a job description, that would be it.
That would be it. Yeah. Do you come across our other colleague who went to the same provenance as you, Brian Dobson, down in Dublin? Do you meet Brian at all?
No.
Brian was there maybe a year or two before you.
I think he had just gone whenever I arrived.
That's right.
I came in '89 when you very kindly gave me my first contract?
It was my joy to so do, because I was desperate to fill the position, and you had a straight look to you and an intelligent way with your language. I thought,
was cheap. I was
this man
cheap.
was the, were you? Is that the reason?
I was
no,
very
I
cheap.
never believed that. Never. But it was a good time, and it was a time of change. It was a time of being in the furnace for politics, because all of the things that were going to lead us out of the maelstrom were there, fermenting as we were there, and we were covering it. We're covering change.
Yeah, and there were a lot of, and I think you deserve credit for it too, there were a lot of young people like me at that time who came through Radio Current Affairs, who've gone on to make very significant contribution. I mean, people like, for example, Stephen Walker, who's now one of my closest friends. And
you must apologise to Stephen for me. Please apologise to Stephen. I went to do a nationwide programme on his wonderful book about the fallen in the Great War. And we discovered that we didn't eventually, we went and we filmed with him and all the rest of it. And we eventually didn't transmit the piece because there wasn't a budget to purchase the footage that we needed to purchase. So it fell through at that. But I owe Stephen Walker an apology, and please pass it to him. Maybe he shall come down and we do something on his book down here.
He published another book subsequently called Hide and Seek, which did extremely well, about Monsignor Hugh Flaherty, who was the
fellow in the Vatican.
The priest in the Vatican who ran the escape line.
That's right. He did that.
He did, and it's been a huge success.
Yeah. But you're the pair of you, in terms of your enthusiasm for the work and your finely honed appreciation of the nuances of Ulster politics, you're much of a muchness. You're peas in a pod, yourself and Walker.
We're good friends.
That's good.
We spend a lot of time together.
I'm glad about that. And that's why I was so sad. The other thing, did you ever hear me grovel publicly like this? It's terrible.
No, I didn't. But it's being recorded.
I know this thing, but I really mean that. I want Stephen to know how vexed I was that this didn't go through.
I don't think he's recovered from it yet, Ron.
I'm sure
he's
he
still
has.
Deeply upset
Well
about
and
it.
truly, I tell you. Now, the book, Alternative Ulsters. Wow, you had Ian Paisley, you had Jerry Adams, you had a whole catalogue of the luminaries of our recent past, the kind of icons. Seamus Heaney, of course, in there, Jennifer Johnson, James Nesbitt, Mary Peters. The notion for the book, you could have written many books. Why this?
Well, I think the starting point was not the individuals, but the starting point was the notion of identity, and it's something that I have always been fascinated with and challenged by in this part of the world, because people take such different views on it. So I think what I wanted to do was to look and see, was there any common ground in the notion of identity? People talk a lot about their Britishness and they talk a lot about their Irishness. Some people talk about being Northern Irish. I wondered if the notion of Ulster identity might unite people, because you could be a Republican from the west of Donegal, and you could be an Ulsterman or woman. You could be a loyalist from East Belfast, and you can be an Ulsterman or woman. So there was something there to start thinking about, and I used that notion of Ulster identity as the diving in point, if you like, to each discussion. What does Ulster mean to you? And to some people it's 6 counties, to some people it's 9 counties.
And is that, we know it's how significant it is, but in terms of those who want to embrace the concept of inclusivity, is it something that rules it out immediately, rules out a joint identity, that difference of 9 or 6?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point to start the conversation on, because not everybody clearly agrees on it. And so there's no resolution to that question. I mean, for some people it's 6 counties and it equals Northern Ireland. For some it's 9. For some it's some sort of ancient mythological notion, and they think about Cuchulainn, and they think about the warlords of the past. For some people like the idea of, I mean, if Ulster is Ulster Rugby, it is Ulster GAA. It was much in vogue 20, 30 years ago. You look at Radio Ulster, you look at Good Morning Ulster, you look at Ulster Television. People don't talk so much about Ulster now, I think. But they do talk about other things now. They do talk about Northern Ireland. I think there's a readiness on the part of some people to talk about Northern Ireland where there perhaps wasn't in the past.
But you would have noticed the political statement made by a man of this territory, and he always did it, Seamus Mallon.
Yeah.
Nice man, a good man, a progressive man. But he would always make the point, even when it wasn't fashionable. He would say, Northern Irish. He always balked at saying Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Because that was too much of a gift to the other people, the opponents.
Yes. But I think maybe, I can't speak for Seamus Mallon, but certainly there has been a change, I think, post-Good Friday Agreement. Seamus Heaney, in one of his last interviews, and certainly the first major interview to be published since his death, says because of the new dispensation, post-1998, he referred in his latter years to this place as Northern Ireland. He never did it in his earlier life, but he certainly did in his later life.
Yeah.
And you've got other people like Eamon McCann. I mean, Eamon McCann from Derry, left of centre. People would regard him as fairly green, although I think he would probably dispute that. But he says, recently he's found himself signing hotel registers as Northern Irish, and he gets a perverse pleasure out of it. He thinks of himself now as Northern Irish. Joe Brawley, he says perfectly relaxed about being Irish or Northern Irish.
Yeah, he's easy with
that.
So
I think there has been a perceptible change in people's minds.
And the thing that started off almost as a fun title, I remember from an afternoon show on Radio Ulster, it was Derry / Londonderry.
Yeah.
That's now in the language. That's the proper.
It is.
We say that because in doing it,
Jerry Anderson's
yeah,
fault,
Jerry
exactly.
Anderson, and in doing it, I'm showing regard to those of my colleagues in the country who believe it to be Londonderry, and if they're using it to me, Derry / Londonderry, they're showing regard for me. And that's a platform of respect that's very important in our growth.
Well, I think that's probably true. Eamon McCann says he absolutely hates Derry Londonderry. I have to say, he says, it's one or the other, and he doesn't like that composite notion. But
that's the language of division,
That's
Mark.
Eamon. Well, it is the official title of the City of Culture. It is Derry Londonderry.
Yeah, is it really?
It is.
You see, my view on it, if we have the city, the title of the city, the proper title of the city is Derry. The title of the county is Londonderry.
Yes, well, a lot of people would say
people
that.
would make that distinction. It's a generosity of spirit on the part of Roman Catholics and part of nationalists to say, you call it Derry, you call it Londonderry, I shall call it Londonderry.
But most people from the city, no matter what their political background,
Derry.
most people would call it Derry.
Yeah, the other's too much of a mouthful.
Well,
But what do you ask the bus driver for when you're getting on on the way up? Could I have a return to Derry / Londonderry, whatever? It's just an element of our quirkiness.
But it's part of it is part of the language of identity, and I think that is what is quite interesting, and that's what the book seeks to tease out, because people have different perceptions. People's perception of their own identity changes.
Yeah.
It has changed through time,
Absolutely.
and it also changes depending where you are. Peter Robinson's quite interesting. In his interview, he says when he goes to America, he would very often be referred to as Irish and being from Ireland. When he's in America, he doesn't take offense at that. It's perfectly all right. He won't correct people.
Yeah.
But if people said that here, he would feel uncomfortable.
Because America's not his battlefield.
No, and I guess he's a visitor there, and I guess he gives people, he cuts them a bit of slack.
Yeah, he does.
Whereas here, he might not do the same thing.
We lost one of your interviewees recently, Seamus Heaney. Now, you're a man of the arts and you're a man who loves language. I suspect you're a man who'd love the presence of Heaney and being with him. What is the memory of the Heaney you sat with and talked to?
Well, I was very lucky that I got to know Seamus down the years through various interviews and events that we worked on together. And, it was a hammer blow whenever Seamus died. And I think a lot of us who knew him a little still haven't recovered. And Michael Longley is a friend. Michael Longley's in the book.
Yeah.
And Michael said to me, Michael came to the launch of the book and he spoke very kindly. And he said, there was a great hole there that night, and a great hole as far as the book's concerned, in that Seamus is no longer with us. But he said he felt that he'd been, knocked down. I think he said he felt he'd been wiped by Seamus's hearse. He just, the whole thing was overwhelming for him, because they'd been close friends since they were young men. But I had a great time with Seamus. Seamus was one of the first people to agree to take part in the project.
Really? Yes.
He was one of the first people I approached, because I thought he would understand it, and also I wanted to be able to say to people, look, you're a significant individual. people like Seamus Heaney are already doing this project, and it
Yeah.
certainly helped.
Yes,
And
yeah.
he wrote me a lovely letter in which he gave me a great line, which I was then able to use with other people.
Yes,
That, you know,
yes.
participation was a must, and I went down. I spent time with him. We did an interview for about 2.5 hours in his drawing room. We had lunch, which he prepared in his kitchen. Mary wasn't there; she'd left it. Seamus and I
Just worked away.
knocked about the kitchen
Yes,
and organised
yeah,
the lunch,
yeah.
and spent the best part of 2.5 hours together talking. And I think his honesty and his integrity and his thoughtfulness comes through, and also his sense of humour. And then I asked him, when I was leaving to get the train back to Belfast, I said, Seamus, I need to get a taxi here. Could you organise that? And he said, oh, it's fine, don't worry. Mary came home, we had a good chat. His secretary Susie was there, we had a good chat. It was very relaxed, and I said, Seamus, I need to get this train. Could you please organise the taxi? And he said, it's fine. Get in the car. And he drove me through Dublin on his own to the train station.
Wow.
Rather than have me get a taxi.
Yeah.
And during that, which was a mark of the man,
Yeah,
and,
we
we
had
had a
a
great
great
chat.
man, a
And
great
then I
man.
said to him during that, because part of the book is the selection of portraits
Yes.
of about a dozen of the
That's right,
participants
that's
by Colin
right.
Davidson. And I
Yes,
said to him
yeah.
on that journey, as he was driving me to the train station, Seamus, would you sit for Colin Davidson? He had seen some of the portraits in the
Yes,
Lyric,
yes.
where I'm involved, and
Yeah.
he had been there at various events, and he'd seen portraits of people like Brian Friel. I said, look, you've seen these portraits. I know you like them. Would you sit for Colin?
Yeah.
We want to use it for the book. He said, of course I will.
That's
So then Colin and I, several weeks later, found ourselves back down again, having lunch with Seamus in the
Seamus
drawing
Zimsky
room.
for the book,
And
yeah.
Colin
Yeah.
was sketching and
Yeah.
photographing, and
Yeah.
I took some photographs of the process, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Magical moments.
Magic. Now you've got your finger on it. Dennis Murray. Goodness gracious.
Your old friend, Dennis.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. I can't remember the whole provenance, but because I'm old now, I can't remember. But he went to RTE, and then we got him from RTE up. John Conway, when I went to meet him and talk him, and he came up and he joined the BBC then at that time. But it's very different when one journalist sets out to interview another journalist. Well, you're treading a difficult and a strange pathway.
Yeah, although I suppose I was... There's a journalistic element to the book, of course there is. But I suppose Dennis was speaking more as a private individual than as a journalist. I mean, the other journalist who's in there is Peter Taylor,
Yes,
who's a
yes,
bit of a
yes.
colossus in terms
Colossus,
of
absolutely.
reporting Northern
Yes,
Ireland
of
to a
course.
national
Yeah.
audience through Panorama and various series about the IRA and about loyalists. And he did another series called The Brits, which was about the role of the British forces in Northern Ireland down the years. And both of them were interesting because I wanted them to give some kind of historical context and some of the maybe factual
Yes.
elements to the story for an audience that maybe didn't know some of the details. So I think different interviews offer different things. But Dennis is intensely personal, and he talks a lot about his own upbringing because his early days were spent in England, and he came back to Northern Ireland as a small child and wasn't very happy. And then he talks a lot about how he coped with some of the dark days of the Troubles.
Yeah.
And so he talks about Omagh and the impact, for example, that Omagh had on him, which was a very large impact.
Has it had, I know the answer for myself, but the things you've seen and the things you've covered over the course of the Troubles, how have they come to rest with you? What effect have they had on you?
I think some things have been hugely difficult, but I feel very blessed to have had a ringside seat during. I've worked in the BBC for 24 years, and they've been pretty interesting times. To be fair, a lot of what I have reported on and discussed has been studio based.
Yeah.
And so where Dennis has been out, standing in the freezing cold, talking to people on the ground in Omagh, I've been in the studio. Now, Omagh had a big impact on me, and it had a big impact on a lot of people. I think what you have to do sometimes is you have to leave things at work and not bring them home with you, because you have to be able to separate your working life from your home life. Otherwise, you would be distracted.
But you were a wise man and a lucky man, because you found your dear wife early in your life, and you had a lovely family together. And that kind of family support and the support of a beautiful wife, a loving wife, that gets a man through many, many things.
Well, it's an antidote to the dark times, I think, and but a lot of people have to deal with that. And I always say it is difficult and it is a challenge. And dealing with the funerals the week after Oma, I remember that we had 2 or 3 days where we maybe had 4 or 5 funerals in a day, and it was relentless. And I was presenting our tea time radio program at the time, and we actually brought in. I remember the sort of sense of despair. People were grasping for words to try to understand quite what was happening. And I remember that what we did was we brought in each day a minister or a priest or whatever, just to try to put some context on it. And I find that was a crutch that I leant on very heavily. It just helped to have somebody reflecting on what was happening and try to, I suppose, give a little bit of hope to people who were listening, because it was difficult. It was very, very difficult and very unrelenting. But I also have to say that it's very important that journalists don't make themselves the story. So while it was very difficult for me in that situation and very difficult for others working on the team in that instance and in others, it was much more difficult for the people who were on the ground, who were burying their loved ones. So it was difficult, but it was a lot easier for us than it was for other people.
Absolutely.
And it's very important that we clarify that.
Indeed. As we see the sharp claws of another enemy come out from the undergrowth of our lives, the dissidents, the extreme loyalists and all of that, can we be optimistic for the future from your seat of political commentating power, if you like?
Well, I think, you have to be an optimist in our game, because who would have thought that the parties would come together and sign the Good Friday Agreement? Who would have thought that the IRA ceasefire would have held? Who would have thought that loyalists would go on ceasefire? Who would have thought decommissioning would happen?
Yes.
Who would have thought Ian Paisley would go into government with Martin McGuinness? These things have happened.
So what's your gut telling you now? What's your gut telling you?
My gut tells me at the moment that there are very difficult conversations to be had as part of the Haas process. But there is always a way to resolve things. There is a way of dealing with the past if the politicians are committed to dealing with the past. I don't know what it is, by the way, but there is a way. Or there are ways. Now, sometimes I think we've been a bit ambivalent about things. Sometimes I think we've left doors open. Sometimes you have to leave a door open. You have to leave a safety valve. But there are also occasions when you need to batten things down, because if you don't, then, your sailing metaphor, then the loose sail starts to flap.
You're going nowhere.
You lose control. But that's the job of politicians, and our job is to, I think, as journalists, is to report on that and is to explain what they're doing, and not to get engaged in value judgment. But I think what the book does is that it shows a lot of politicians, as well as others, writers and journalists, as real thinking individuals. And you get people like, Robinson, Paisley, McGuinness, Adams, talking as private citizens about their private thoughts, which is, I think, what's quite interesting about that. And you hear them saying things in the book that you wouldn't hear them saying in a 5-minute interview on a radio or a television programme.
The book, Alternative Ulsters, by Mark Carruthers, my friend and colleague, Conversations on Identity, is available now, and it's published by Liberties North. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
You're a great man. It's good to see you.
Thank you.